Thank you for that very warm welcome. But actually, I feel quite modest in this company because I didn't understand the importance of climate change as early as some people, as early as Marlene Moses, as she spoke so eloquently, because it was affecting her country some time ago, or Bill McKibben, who has been preaching and trying to build the movement that we're now seeing emerging, and Donald Brown and Lester Brown, and Sean Sweeney, who reminded me we spoke here 4 years ago in this very venue. I came to climate change because I was doing human rights work in Africa. I was working for an organization called Realizing Rights because we were pioneering how you do economic and social rights, important rights like rights to food and safe water and health and education. And there weren't many organizations at that time that were taking those rights sufficiently seriously. So we were working with governments, but we were holding governments to account, and we were very small, so we had to partner, and I was the front person for this organization. So I was traveling to a lot of African countries, and I began to hear a refrain about 2003, 2004, but things are so much worse. And the so much worse was all about, we no longer know when the rainy seasons will come. We used to have seasons where we could plant and harvest. Now we have long periods of drought and then flash flooding. We have sea surge coming and devastating this part of our city. It was all over Africa. It was drought, it was flooding in the one country sometimes. And I realized that this was the biggest human rights issue. When I started to read the science, when I started to understand, I became aware that we were moving inexorably towards a terrible catastrophe. And why were we not realizing this more? Why were we not waking up to it? So I actually begin by paying tribute to those who've spoken before me this evening, who've been at this a lot longer. And I think there are many of you in the audience who have been championing the need to have a global movement about climate justice, about climate change being unacceptable if it is going to destroy our ecosystem, our world, and that we need to come together on that. More recently, as you know, I was asked by the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon to be one of the special envoys on climate change. And it came as a complete surprise to me because I was very focused on my work as a special envoy in the Great Lakes region and would have been there at least until next March and maybe longer. And he said, no, the Great Lakes is important, you're doing good work there, but I need you for climate change because it is the overwhelming issue. It is the issue that will lead to conflict. It is the issue that will undermine development. It is the issue we have to address as a complete priority. And then he said to me, and I know what he meant, and I need a woman. You know, it's nice when the Secretary-General says, I need a woman, and woo! And climate change needs a woman because there are incredible gender dimensions to climate change. When you're undermining poverty, when you're undermining food security, who picks up the pieces? Who keeps the family and the community together? And who needs to be resourced more? And that's another reason why we need to really accelerate women's rights globally, because women are at the heart of the climate issue. So I find that it's a very important moment. It really is. I never usually speak about speeches that I made elsewhere, but I've thought a lot about this issue. I've woken up every morning thinking about it. And when I was asked to speak in Normandy on the 5th of June, the day before the big day when the heads of state were going to be there, I put a lot of thought into that speech. And what I did was I compared two sets of years, 1944-45 and 2014-2015, our period. What happened in 1944-45? We'd had 2 world wars, a Holocaust, dropping of atomic bombs in Japan, the opening up of a Cold War with the Soviet Union. And the leaders at the time, and they were colonial powers, some of them, to say the least of it. It wasn't all a democratic world as it more is now, but they were driven by that mantra of never again. They were driven to take decisions, and they took them. The Charter of the United Nations, the Marshall Plan for Europe, the Bretton Woods institutions, and a few years later, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They understood that we had to take decisions that would be necessary to set the world on a different course. And I completely compare where we are now. I completely compare it. This is the most unique time when in 2014, 2015, particularly next year, 2015, we have to get leaders to take decisions that are transformative. We have to change course. As Marlene Moses knows in her country now, Nauru, I was with the Secretary General in Samoa recently, and Marlene was there. I heard leaders of small island states speak with tears in their eyes and with a sense of complete urgency about the existential threat of climate change now for their countries, and that we have to wake up and we have to realize it. And we know that no country is going to escape this. Every country is beginning to feel the impacts, but there is an injustice about it, which is why I formed this Foundation on Climate Justice. It's the poorest countries and the poorest communities that are being affected by, frankly, our lifestyles, the way that we use fossil fuel to live the lifestyles we're lucky enough to have lived. And they are damaging the poor life chances of countries. They are very much impacting on rights to food and safe water and health and education and shelter, and they're displacing people. I like to tell a story of a friend of mine, Ursula Rakova. I met Ursula because she was one of the climate-wise women, and I listened to her, and she's a wonderful person to tell her story. I think she'll be here in New York during this Climate Week. She is moving her population from the small Cataract Island, 1,500 people, to part of Papua New Guinea. And she has to negotiate for the land in Papua New Guinea, where they are willing to negotiate. She has to negotiate relationships. You know, when you're moving 1,500 people into a new territory, that's difficult. You've got to negotiate all of that. And then she says, with great sadness, which is very profound, she says, there is nothing I can do about the fact that we are moving from the land of the bones of our ancestors. An indigenous people moving from the land of the bones of their ancestors. And if we don't get this right soon, there will be more and more people who will have to move from the land of the bones of their ancestors. And they shouldn't have to, because that's their life, that's their heritage, that's their identity. It's a very difficult thing to do. You can try and get stories from the elders to help you and try and have a visual memory of the place, but it's not the same. So we have to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius, and we're not on course. We're not on course. We're on course for a very unsafe world of 3, maybe 4 degrees. And we know from the World Bank report, Turn Down the Heat, what 4 degrees looks like. It is catastrophic. And this will come sooner than some were predicting, because all of the tipping points are coming sooner. And we had a report recently from the New Climate Economy Commission under President Calderon, the former president of Mexico, and his colleagues, that it's good for every country to be now taking climate action and to be doing it because that's where the future is for jobs and employment. We need to change the mindset. We can't have business as usual with a bit of green attached. That will not do. And anybody who thinks we can get away with something very mild is not looking at the true picture. My foundation has commissioned a report, and we have a rough draft that we're working on how we get to 0 carbon emissions by 2050 and do it equitably. How we do that, do it equitably. And I can tell you it's not going to be easy. And the more we see it's not going to be easy, the more we see what rich countries have to do. That's the point. That's the point. They have to do far more than they're doing, and we have to get serious about that. And that is why the United States has to lead. And there is leadership in the United States. It's not coming from Congress, we know that, but it is coming. It's coming from states like California, it's coming from cities, it's coming from communities, it's coming from many of you. who are working in your communities to change the environment. And that is what is needed, because this great country has to lead us on to get the climate agreement we need. I'm going to be marching tomorrow with Gro Brundtland. Gro Brundtland and myself are elders, so treat us with some respect, especially treat me with some respect, because the last time I marched in a climate march, I have to confess, was in Glasgow, when Civicus organised a climate march for climate justice. And I had a placard that said, I can't remember what it said about climate justice, but the point was that as I marched along beside Ela Bhatt, another elder from India, my placard apparently was upside down. And, and Ela said to me, "Mary, fix your placard," and we marched on. But this is going to be a march of a different kind, I think. It's going to be a march that's very inclusive. It's going to be a march of people of colour, of trade unions, of people who come from all backgrounds and walks of life. And it's going to be a march where a number of ministers will be marching, elders will be marching, the Secretary-General will meet the march. It is not a them and us. It is us. It is us. We are the us. The us. We are the people who need to march. We are the people who need to know. And I really pay tribute to the, whatever it is, 1,500 organizations who've come together. And it's happening, as you know, in London and Rio and all kinds of places. But we have to keep it going. We have to keep this movement going to Lima and on to Paris. We have to keep the pressure going, because this is all about climate change is all of these things. It is a political issue, it is a development issue, it is a scientific issue, it is an environmental issue, it is a moral issue, and to me it is fundamentally a human rights issue. It's about our humanity. It's about the great decisions we have to take in 2015. We are back in that strange time, like 1944-45, where decisions have to be taken, the moral imperative to do the right thing. It's now. It's next year, and we have to keep up the momentum. So I salute everyone who's been involved in creating this movement, because it is us, and it is now, and it is so urgent for the future, for our children and our grandchildren. I actually, my last point will be, I'm a grandmother. I'm an Irish grandmother. I'm happy to have 5 grandchildren. Oh, I'm so happy about that. And I think about the world that my grandchildren will live in 2050. They'll be in their 40s. They'll share the planet with 9 billion other people, maybe a bit more than 9 billion. What kind of world? And what will they say about us? Let's hope they will say, we know they organized in 2014, there was the Climate Summit, the People's March, and from then on, we took the right decisions. That's what we need to do. Thank you.